Hi, everyone. It's Tessa.
And Joe.
From the Unveiling Paradise podcast.
Tessa, summer is almost here, and so many of our listeners are about to have their epic destination wedding.
And we are so excited for you guys.
Before the big day, guys, we want you to make sure you listen to these 3 episodes.
Episode 62, Deep Diving Your Wedding Ceremony.
Episode 53, Questions Your Wedding Guests Will Ask.
And episode 31, the final countdown to your wedding day.
And if you're planning your wedding here in Hawaii, hit us up and ask us about our Unveiling Paradise podcast promo.
Happy planning.
Welcome, everyone, to the Unveiling Paradise podcast show. Hello, Tessa.
Hey, Joe. How are you?
I am so good. Today, we are talking about weddings.
What? Shocking. Weddings.
We talk a lot about weddings, all the details that go into creating your perfect day, the bar, the food, the decor. But I want to take a huge step back and talk about how do we create a successful marriage? If we're spending all this money on our big day, it can't be just for that day alone.
Exactly. The wedding, the reception, the party, it's all a big deal. But at the end of the day, after you say I do, after the party is over, now what?
Reality.
Reality kicks in. And I think that's kind of what we want to touch on today.
Absolutely. And we have an amazing in-studio guest, Pastor Mark Turansky of New Horizon Counseling, who's going to be talking to us today. We want to talk about how to navigate not only your wedding day, the stresses of your wedding day, but how do you set yourself up for success from day one? So welcome to the show, Mark.
Hey, Joe. Hey, Tessa. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really enjoying this. We've been working together for a long time, all of us, right? Doing weddings. I've been doing weddings here in Hawaii for over 20 years, but also I do marriage counseling. And so I see both sides of the fence, so to speak. And I think this is a great podcast subject matter because oftentimes couples get so focused on that big day that they forget really what they're doing, and that is joining together for life, ideally, right? And life can be difficult at times, and if we're not prepared for that, then as those difficult times come, you're going to stumble, you're going to bumble, and then all of a sudden you're going to throw up your hands. And so I love what you guys are doing here. This is more of a big picture type of thought, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like a lot of couples probably don't even make it to that finish line of actually getting married because they haven't really figured out how to have a successful relationship in the first place.
And how to navigate through conflict. That really is where the challenges start to come.
I want to hear all about that. I think it's such an important point. But before we get started, Mark, why don't you give us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, I've been here in Hawaii since 1978, moved here a long time ago. And right off the bat, I got into the ministry as a youth pastor and then as a regular pastor of a church. And I was in the ministry for 30 years. And so that's where I started being, doing weddings and being introduced to this whole idea of being an officiant. And I love that part. But also as a pastor, you do a lot of counseling. And as I was doing more and more counseling, I really discovered that that was my true gifting. And so I retired from the pastorate, or from the pulpit, put it that way. I'm still an ordained minister, in 2014 in order to pursue my counseling practice full time. Now I'm up on the North Shore in Haleiwa, and I'm running a program called New Horizons Counseling. We do a variety of different counseling, but one of the mainstays of our program is relational enhancement. How to teach couples what's going on, how to manage their triggers, issues, and baggage, how to communicate with each other better. And it's just a wonderful delight. My wife and I both run a retreat called Relationship 911 Retreats, where a couple will come and stay on our property, and they'll work with us for a 3-day period of time. And we teach them all sorts of tools and tricks in order for them to have a successful marriage.
Well, it's really great to have you on the show today because Tessa and I get to see you really for, 15, 20 minutes on a wedding day. We hear a lot about your advice when you're officiating the ceremony, but now we get to take a deep dive into this. I'm so excited. So welcome to the show and let's get started.
Welcome to Unveiling Paradise, your go-to destination wedding podcast. I'm Tessa, wedding planner and owner of Fred & Kate Events.
And I'm Joe, wedding and adventure photographer of Joseph Esser Photography. We are based in Hawaii, one of the biggest, most popular locations for destination weddings.
We want to share our real-life experiences with you, give you insight from a professional's perspective, and still make sure you're having fun in the process.
We're huge believers in the fact that planning a destination wedding can be one of the most amazing experiences, and we want to bring you along.
We're so excited to talk with you about weddings, Hawaii, and everything else under the sun.
So pack your bags and let's get started.
Welcome back to the show. Today we are talking with Pastor Mark Turansky about relationships and how to navigate wedding planning and stress. And again, we kind of talked about it earlier that it's so easy to get caught up in the party, right? The food, the decor, the photographer, your wedding planner, all of these details, because there's so many details. But when you take a step back and you kind of take a deep breath and you kind of just reassess, at the end of the day, you're marrying the person that you love. And I think people will often put that to the side because it feels like it's something that's just there. They've already committed, they've already managed it, and it'll be fine. But like everything else, it has to be taken care of. It has to be nurtured. And that's why we are so excited to have you here today to kind of talk a little bit about just kind of navigating that. I know you have a program called Relationship 911. Can you kind of high level tell us what that's all about?
Sure. Relationship 911 can come in 3 different formats. It can come in just a very simple package that I use for my premarital counseling, and that's 4 sessions with me. Also, there's a 2-day intensive in my office where people will stay 2 consecutive days and work with me in my office. And then there's our top shelf program, and that is Relationship 911 retreats. And those are run by both my wife and I. And we invite people onto our property. We have an apartment that they stay in. And for that 3-day period of time, they work very closely with us in an intensive format to go through the program. And so the program itself is divided up into several parts. The first part is becoming aware of your imprint style. And your imprint style is how you and I have developed managing conflict in our lives. Because of our family of origin, our upbringing, our cultural experience, we developed this way of dealing with conflict. And if you don't know what your imprint style is, you will just unconsciously default to that. And it can be problematic in a relational context. Also, whatever your imprint style is, it's going to have a clashing effect with your partner's imprint style, even if they're the same. And if you're not aware of that, then you're going to stumble over that as well. So we always start with that kind of information just to help people understand what the potential problems could be or what is going on in their current relationship where they're starting to have falter and have problems.
So what are like the imprint styles? So what are the types of imprint styles? Is it like you're a psycho? No.
Well, for the
That's
first
not a
part,
style.
one of the imprint styles, there's 6 of them actually. One of them is our secure connector, and that's when we're operating with one another in the most healthy part of ourselves. We're treating each other with love and respect and honor, with listening, good skills. All of that comes from our secure connector. But the other 5 are the ones that create potential problems. So for instance, mine. I tend to be an avoider. All right. So when conflict comes up, I want to just sweep it under the rug, pretend it doesn't exist, right? Don't want to talk about it. I'll get busy with tax. I'll convince myself it's not a big deal. That's the avoidant. There are another imprint style is called the pleaser. The pleaser will try to pacify the problem, try to appease, try to do nice things so that you'll get you on my good side and we don't have to deal with the problem. Then there's an imprint style called the vacillator, where the vacillator really idealizes when everything's going great, it's perfect. But when something doesn't go well, they swing to the other side and their first response is anger. And they use anger to try to manage that conflictive time. Then, of course, there's the victim. The victim is one that has a learned helplessness mindset about life. And so when a problem comes up, they put up their hands. Nothing could be done. I can't do anything. The solution's outside of myself. And they will also use guilt and manipulation in order to manage that conflict. And then, of course, the controller. The controller is a person who tries to micromanage and has very strong preferences, and those preferences become law and they push them on other people. And that's why we don't like controllers in our life, because of that feeling like it's oppressing us at that moment. So when we take these assessments and look at these imprint styles, couples can see exactly what they're defaulting to many times because of their family of origin or cultural upbringing or past relationship experience. They develop these imprint styles unconsciously. And when they come into conflict, boom, these imprint styles come out. They try to use them in order to manage the situation because there's a certain amount of efficiency and effectiveness with it. But then it ends up in an argument, and that's where we all don't want to go. So that's the first step place to look, imprint styles.
I think this is so interesting. And I think you can definitely, my thought is you can jump from different ones. I don't know if I would categorize myself in just one. I definitely know I'm not the good one. But I guess my question for you, though, is, with this, the imprint style, it's so good to know going into a relationship or going into your wedding planning. Is this something that you do? Is this relationship 911 something that you do during the pre-wedding pre-counsel, or is this kind of after they're already married and you're working through problems?
Well, both. I mean, I think it would be fantastic if couples would put on their agenda before they get married a premarital counseling course. But what I've also found out is that people go blissfully into marriage. I know I did in my first relationship that didn't end well because I didn't know any of this emotional intelligence stuff, right? And you think love's going to be enough and we're just going to be able to handle as we move forward. But as time goes by and conflict starts to rear its ugly head, that's when people oftentimes will come back and say, that relationship 911 thing, we'd like to do that now, right? So you're more apt to do it afterwards because of the pain in many cases. But it's a great idea to start with it before you even get married. Is
there like a one-course cheat sheet beforehand?
A one course
or one session versus a 4.
You might need more than one course.
I'm just trying to think how we can get couples to engage in this.
Look, something is better than nothing, right? And if a couple just wants to spend an hour with me, I'll throw a bunch of stuff at them, and at least that information could be somewhat helpful to them, right? Something is better than nothing. But the bare minimum as far as me getting out, the helpful information to a couple and having them experience it and understand it usually takes about 4 sessions.
Sure.
And what I love is just put this in the back of your mind to all of our listeners. Like, this is such a huge part of why you're having this big wedding day. You're celebrating your relationship. Why not have an epic relationship? And I think a lot of times we don't take that time as a couple to learn like our conflict styles. I know that, we talk about imprint style. I also was thinking as you were speaking, everyone also has a love language. The thing, you might have a way to deal with conflict, but you also have a way that you communicate love to each other.
Yes.
And so how do we know that? How do we get to know that language that each other speaks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Love Language is a very popular book. Gary Chapman wrote that a while back, and a lot of couples gravitate toward that just because of the success of it. And we advocate for it, but we look at it as the icing on the cake. It's not the cake. You got to get down below that, because the love language idea comes after things are going good, and how can we keep that momentum going? But when things are breaking down, the love language principles aren't probably going to help you very much in those times of desperation. That's where we got to dig way down deep and look and see how we really are dealing with conflict or not, which is most of the case, especially with people here in Hawaii. We tend to, even as a culture here in Hawaii, be avoider and pleasers. It's interesting as you go to different places around the world, how culturally the conflict resolution styles will be embedded in that culture as well.
So, Pastor Mark, I just have to ask this question. You're meeting with couples before they're actually married. Are there some times where you're like, I don't think this is going to work if you guys can't figure out these basic things? And how do you deal with that?
I always hope for the best, and you hope that the information you're giving them will seat inside their heart and their brain, and that they will take that forward and utilize the skills that because my objective is, and I always say this, I want you to need me coming in, but I don't want you to need me going out. Yeah. What that means is I'm very practical in my approach. I'm going to teach you skills that you can use to maintain your own marriage. And so most people, if they're willing to learn that new skill set and they apply themselves, because it's really hard when you're in conflict. That's when we trigger. That's when things are all bets are off, right? And I just want to get mad. And we have that adrenaline rush of anger. That's where I have to contain myself and then point to the area that I need to focus on and then utilize the skills that I've learned in that program in order for me to navigate through that successfully.
I love that, and I think just understanding your conflict, your imprint style is such a good first step. What next?
Once you understand what your own imprint style is, then you have to look at your partner and find out what theirs is. And sometimes it's the same. And you think, well, if it's the same, we're going to get along. Everything's going to be good. Nah.
I can't imagine 2 passive people.
Well, okay. So 2 passive people would be like 2 avoider pleasers that marry one another. Okay. But what happens is they're constantly stepping aside from the conflict and not really dealing with it. And that will build up over and over and over time. And then there'll be the big blowout, right? And that's what we're trying to avoid. And so also the end case of that are two avoiders maybe marrying over time. They become like brothers and sister under the same roof. They lose that passion in the relationship, almost become like business partners. So they may say, well, we don't ever fight, but then where's the zing from their marriage? It's all long past gone, you see.
Right.
Once I found out what my partner's imprint style is, then I look at what we call a fear dance. Now, a fear dance is when I'm triggered by this individual. Triggers really are internal emotional fears. Like if I have a fear of I'm not going to be heard or not be respected or not be validated, or I fear that I'm going to be misunderstood or misportrayed. Those fears are triggers. And that's where then I have a reaction. The reaction might be to escalate or to shut down or to, get into a yes, but argument or become a lawyer. There's all sorts of different types of behavior patterns. And so we have this tool we call the fear dance. And really what it is, it's a schematic of every argument a couple's ever had. And you're able to look at this cycle and you're able to see the patterns that you do. You're able to see what you want, the fear that happens when conflict comes up, and the negative reaction pattern that creates more destructiveness, and how that negative reaction pattern puts a fear in the partner, and then they negatively react, and then you just cycle that thing until it goes down the toilet and everybody ding-zings to their neutral corners and they don't want to talk about it anymore. And that is a great tool, the fear dance, to be able to visually see what's going on in a couple when they have these conflicts.
I think this is what's really fascinating about this conversation too, for me, is like a lot of times when we're getting married, this is all uncharted territory, and so just being able to understand your different ways of communicating, your different ways of explaining your own emotions and whatever, like you think about just being married, we're starting to commingle finances. We're trying to figure out how to live under the same roof together. This seems like such a foundational thing to be able to understand, take that deep dive into each other's ways of having emotions, portraying emotions, and how do we deal with those conflicts? Like the charting of it. How do you get your couples to open up to that process? I mean, it seems like,
I think looking at the big picture of what is marriage for, and the way I look at marriage, it is the ultimate character scrubbing device known to man. I think God had created marriage for that purpose, because you're right, two people becoming one, having to do life together, that is difficult. It's my opinion that marriage is one of the most difficult things you will ever do in life. It's harder than your career. It's going to be harder than raising kids, harder than anything, because of that fact. Two individual people coming together as one, unified, living their life together. And so this creates all sorts of hidden minefield of conflict or potential conflict that most couples go into blissfully unaware until they start cropping up. And so once they understand that these potential areas of conflict actually are for their benefit, meaning that it develops my character. It creates a more loving person out of me, a more empathy, more compassion. That's what I believe, and makes me ultimately, hopefully, a better human being, so that I will operate better in the world and then show God's energy to other people. I think that is the purpose of marriage. And without that rubbing of conflict, you're not going to get the desired result, because life doesn't happen in a vacuum. And when I'm living independently by myself, then I cruise along thinking everything is okay. But when I combine with another human being, that's where my issues, big and triggers and baggage start to rear their ugly head. A lot of people, there's a myth out there and says, well, we're having problems in our relationship, so we're going to work on ourselves separately. And when we fix ourselves, we're going to come back together. That's the biggest false myth you will ever hear. Okay. Because when you're separate, you're not going to be triggered. It's when you're together that you're triggered. And that's when I do relational counseling. Optimally, it's best to have both parties there present, dealing with these concepts, learning these new skills, because it's when they're together that the conflict is going to happen, not when they're separate.
I mean, I've been married for almost 16 years, and I think there's this feeling that like you go into a marriage and you're still in this honeymoon stage. You're still maybe not really understanding what makes your partner tick, what sets off your partner. And also like just having a grounded reality and knowing that like you are going to face major challenges in your own life, in your life together as a couple. this is something that if you are willing to be open to those conversations, I think you're going to have success.
And I think a good breeding ground for them is preparing for the wedding ceremony.
Yeah.
As we all know, we witness it every time we do a ceremony. It's stress-filled USA. People are just running around with their heads cut off. And for months, they're worried about this, that, and the other thing. How are my in-laws going to work? Are we going to put them at the reception? How, X going to get along with the new wife or whatever it is? There's just so many variables here that create potential stress. And those stress factors leak into the relationship as you go along. And there's little tiny arguments or quarrels many times. And that's right there, a little microcosm of what life is going to be about, right? And so it's really the perfect time to test out your conflict resolution skills in that relationship. And more importantly, good communication skills, which is the highlight of what we do in our relationship programs.
So again, we've done the fear dance. We've kind of mapped it all out. We know kind of what the triggers are. What next?
Great question, Tessa, because really, what is the solution? And when couples come in and do counseling with us, they already intuitively know what the problem is and what the solution is. And they say, we don't communicate. And they're absolutely right. We're communicating, but we're communicating with a particular style that we call business talk. Business talk is a wonderful way of communicating, but it will not help you in times of stress and conflict. Business talk only focuses on the solution. What are we going to do about this? How are we going to fix this, right? And so whenever couples come together and they're arguing about something, their conversation tone always turns to that, and they argue over the solution. And they're missing an important step. And the important step is, what is the concerns that are embedded in that conflict of each individual? Why are they upset? Why are they worried? And so a different type of communication is needed. And we teach a communication style called heart talk, H-E-A-R-T, heart talk. Heart talk has a different goal than business talk. Of course, business talk exists and it's an important way of communicating. The goal is to solve problems. Heart talk goal is only to understand. And so I'm trying to understand why this is upsetting to you. And so it's a whole different methodology of having that conversation. It sounds easy, but it's very difficult. It's awkward at first, but it's just a life skill. And once, when you watch people argue and they walk away and they're just frazzled and frustrated because they've been arguing sometimes for hours, you'll never hear them say, I'm so mad that we didn't come up with a solution today. No one will ever say that. What they will say is this: you're not listening to me. Right. You haven't heard a word I said. You're talking over me. You don't care what I think. That's what makes us so angry. And that's what heart talk addresses. It's a particular style of communication with the end result of each person feeling totally heard and understood with empathy and compassion. Once that is done, then you move back to business talk, and you'll find that people are way more willing to compromise or negotiate, or I might even go along with what you want to say. Oftentimes you'll hear people say that I was so mad because you just weren't listening to me. Now that you took the time to listen to me, I don't care what we do. Right. And that oftentimes will happen. And heart talk paves the way for that in a beautiful way. So we teach that skill in our communication workshops.
I love that. I think about, when I argue with my husband on times or my family or my friends, right? It's that you're not listening to me. And so I love that that is what you kind of really hit on the nail in this whole counseling session.
Yes, in the program itself, right? Okay. We start with looking at the problem, like with the fear dance and the imprint styles, but that's not enough. We have to then go to, okay, now we understand what's creating hiccups. Now what do we do about it? And heart talk is the solution.
I love that. And so again, coming back to this program, because I think it's so great. What if you're not super religious? Because I know, for example, with Catholic, it's required to do the premarital counseling. You have to do these things, which I think is great. For a lot of our couples that aren't super religious, they don't have this or understand that this is an opportunity that would be so great for them to do beforehand. But they're like, well, I'm not really religious. I'm not really going to go to church for this. What would you do if you're not really religious? Is this still a course for them?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, religion has nothing to do with this.